Welcome to Mr. and Mrs. Creeps. Tonight's story is about a young mother who hears and sees the unexplained. Please note, while this story is for entertainment purposes only, the audio you are going to hear is real. It was the end of a very long day, and the baby was fussy at bedtime, but with a little patience, she finally fell asleep in her mother's arms as they lay in bed. Nicole saw her opportunity as the baby had drifted so deep into sleep that her little face had smushed into the bed, and she began to breathe heavier and heavier. Like an experienced cat burglar, she slipped an arm out from underneath her little angel and slid quietly out of bed. She creaked the door open, and her loyal dog, Belle, followed behind her as she walked through. Nicole made herself a cup of tea while putting Belle and her other dog, Cooper, out for a late-night break. It was nice to have the house quiet and peaceful. After quicking up a bit and letting the dogs back in, Nicole skillfully peeked in on her daughter and then made her way to the computer to edit some photos she had taken earlier in the week. The tea was warm and full of flavor, and the photos were mostly shot so well that little editing would be required. This made her very thankful because even though she was enjoying some rare alone time, she was tired and ready to lay down for the night. There was this loud clanking noise from an old dryer vent pipe that ran from the ceiling to the floor, which made her jump. She heard stink bugs clanking around in there before, but this was notably louder. It made her wonder if there was a small bird or a bat that had somehow got past the vent guard on the roof. She quickly moved the dogs out of the room just in case this little creature did make its way down to the opening, and she closed the door right behind him. The perks of having a husband who works C-shift is there's always enough room in the bed for her, the little one, and the dogs, but nights like tonight where she may have to handle an uninvited guest, the dogs, and the baby made her wish her husband was by her side. She stood there quietly, holding her breath, listening intently to the wall. The banging had started to travel not down as she expected it to, but rather horizontally and closer to the center of the house. She now was thinking there might be an animal in the attic, and her heart sank. Bat or bird would be bad enough, but some time, patience, and a blanket could handle all that. But a squirrel or a raccoon in the attic filled her with dread. She picked up the phone and called her husband, which is something that she never did, so he should know that this was important and he needed to pick up, but he didn't. She sent him a text message to have him call her as soon as possible because she may need advice or she may need him to come home. She kept her eyes glued to the crease where the wall met the ceiling, where she could hear the erratic banging. Nicole was quickly going through all her options and found herself wondering if there would be any clues as to what was going on in the attic on the roof. The access to the attic needed a ladder, which was in the garage, and there was this heavy wood plank that had to be lifted into the attic to gain access. Because of this, she opted to check the roof first. She put on her trusty Crocs and grabbed a flashlight. It was cold outside, but she didn't think she would be out there long and brave the night air with just her t-shirt and leggings. There was still some snow on the ground, and she felt the need to take careful steps not to slip and fall as she headed into the backyard. Armed with her very bright flashlight, she guided it to the roof and had a moment of panic. What if there was something crazy up there that she wasn't prepared to see? Nicole laughed at herself and continued to scan the roof, looking for signs of damage or feathers. There was nothing on the back of the house. She walked to the side of the house and looked up and saw nothing. But as she headed to the front yard, she heard loud banging from just beyond the cemetery across the street. It was so loud, it almost sounded like Native American drumming, loud enough to be right across the street, but it was very clearly a distance away. She stood there in silence, trying to wrap her brain around what she was hearing that late at night. Nicole's thoughts were interrupted by the creaking of the back door. She immediately ran to make sure something wasn't getting into the house, and thankfully it was Belle coming out of the slightly opened door. Where Nicole was, so was Belle. Even now in the cold weather, she stood watching her intently. She left Belle in the backyard, sighing with relief since Belle was going to be guarding the door, and made her way back to the front of the house. She pulled out her phone and hit record, hoping to catch the sound on video. She scanned to the left and to right, stared deeply into the cemetery and the trees beyond it, trying to gain some insight into what was causing this weird percussion sound that made its way all the way into the house. The cold night bit at her bare skin, but she barely felt it as she was lost in curiosity. After recording for about a minute, she sent the video to her husband to ask if he had ever heard anything like this before. She noticed that he never texted back or called, and she was a little annoyed as she looked down at her phone. Just then, she heard her name being called off to the left. It startled her so much that she snapped her head up and almost dropped her phone. There was no one there, just the neighbor's empty yard, and she decided to send a message over to the neighbors just in case someone was standing in the dark. But all the lights were off in the house, so she was confident that they were sleeping. She almost felt a little guilty, but this banging sound was so abnormal that she didn't mind if she woke them up. Nicole's desire to know if there was something that she couldn't see grew, so she went back into the house and grabbed the night vision binoculars. She brought Belle inside, grabbed a jacket, the baby monitor, and a key to the house. She left strict instructions with Cooper and Belle that they were to stay with the baby no matter what. Cooper was a typical bully breed. He hated the cold, so he was happy to crawl into bed and snuggle up under the covers. Thankfully, with all the noise, the little one had not woken up. Belle, on the other hand, had protested, and she went right to the window to keep watch. Nicole sent another message to her husband that something weird was happening and that she was headed outside to check it out and locking the house just in case. He should hear from her shortly, and if he didn't, something was wrong and that he needed to come home ASAP. When she went out, she scanned the neighbor's yard, looking for whoever called her name, but there was no one there. Nicole thought maybe she had imagined it, and because she was so interested in that sound, she panned upwards just past the cemetery, and she was stunned. There were multiple orbs of light flying upward. They were yellowish white and varied in intensity and varied in size. She had never seen anything like that before. She dropped the night vision from her eyes just to confirm that they could not be seen with the naked eye. But the longer she watched, the more lights began to appear and change direction. They were flying horizontally and parallel to one another, and then they would shoot straight upward. Nicole reasoned that they could not be satellites or planes because in about an hour there were hundreds. She wondered if she was really witnessing UFO activity. She went back into the house, and by that time the banging had completely stopped. And like any normal person these days, she jumped on the town's social media page to discover that there was a large water main break. That at least explained the banging inside the house. That must have been the pipes. But she was unsure about that percussion sound outside. And even if that percussion sound was caused by the break, it still led her to this unexplained aerial phenomenon, and that's what consumed her now. Coincidentally, there was another water main break in a neighboring town. Nicole never cared for coincidences. Could the double water main break somehow have been caused by the UFO activity? She was going through all the options and reading the online posts when the phone rang, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. Her husband was calling. His voice was panicked, and she could tell there was a bit of an apology in there, too. She told him what was going on, and he didn't hesitate. He told her that he did not want her to go outside alone and to stay inside. She protested, saying that maybe this always happens, and tonight was the night that she finally caught it. He reminded her that the night vision binoculars used an infrared beam, and that meant if anybody was looking in her direction with night vision, they would very clearly see her. He did make a good point, and she promised to stay inside. She suddenly felt uneasy, kind of like she was being watched, so she walked over to the door and locked it. She checked the baby monitor to find the little one fast asleep with Coop lying at the end of the bed. He was a good dog to her. He always gave her space and lovingly put up with her learning curve on how to treat a dog. Belle was nervously pacing around Nicole as she hung up the phone and took off her jacket and trusty shoes. She tried to calm her down, but something was off. She ran back to the window, her hackles up. Nicole didn't see anything. She shushed Belle as quietly and sternly as she could, but Belle was having none of it. Nicole grabbed the night vision and thought to herself, okay, just one last look. And what she saw made her start to shake. Her pulse quickened and her throat became tight. There were 3 orbs just beyond the tree line across the street. She didn't know what to do. She knew with the night vision they might know exactly where she was, but without them, she wouldn't know anything. And she decided that they must already know someone was watching, and that's why they were making a beeline right for her. They were so bright, it was hard to look at them. There was no discernible shape. It was just an orb of light. And Belle lost her mind, snapping at the window and barking, and Cooper was quick to come in to back her up. Both the family dogs were ready to jump through the window and chase these things that encroached on their territory off. Nicole could barely take a breath. She was so terrified. And in a flash, the orbs went into what can only be described as hyperdrive and flew over the house. And there was no sound. There was no vibration. They were silent. The baby crying was the only thing that broke the trance of fear that Nicole was in. She rushed into the bedroom to find the little one safe, just shaken by the dog's barking. Nicole lay down and texted her husband to send him an update. He said he was on the way home. He loved them and wanted them to stay safe. Despite the adrenaline coursing through Nicole's veins, she passed out fairly quickly. And when she woke the next morning, she hit the town message boards to find no one else heard the percussion sound, even though there were several people awake at that time. And some of those people even went outside just because Nicole had mentioned it, and they didn't hear anything. And of course, no one saw the lights in the sky. The performance almost felt like it was only for her to see. Nicole sat across from her husband, drinking a very strong cup of coffee, and she wondered if more was coming. Good night. Sleep tight. Don't let the bedbugs bite. Under starry skies till morning light. Thank you for listening.